I live in a high-rise apartment downtown, a place I earned with late nights and a relentless drive to succeed in the financial world. My life was a carefully constructed tower of stability, built on logic and numbers, a stark contrast to the chaotic financial tides that always seemed to swamp my family. I thought I had built my fortress high enough to be safe from their storm. This is the story of how my own father tried to chain me to a sinking ship with a staggering $900,000 debt, and how I used the very skills he never valued to turn the tables on his lifetime of manipulation. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The aroma of my mother's roast beef, a scent usually synonymous with comfort and warmth, hung heavy in the air, thick with an unspoken tension. Sunday dinners at my parents' house had become a mandatory ritual, less about family bonding and more about maintaining a fragile peace. My father, David, sat at the head of the table, a king in his suburban castle, while my mother, Susan, fluttered between the kitchen and the dining room, her anxiety a palpable presence. My younger brother, Ryan, slouched in his chair, scrolling through his phone, a portrait of entitled apathy. "Morgan, you're quiet tonight," my father observed, his voice a low rumble that always set my teeth on edge. It was the same voice that praised my achievements in public but dismissed my career as a cute little numbers job in private. "Just a long week, Dad," I replied, pushing a piece of carrot around my plate. A long week of closing a multi-million-dollar merger, but to him, it was just a week. "Speaking of long weeks," he said, wiping his mouth with a napkin with performative grace. "We have something to discuss. A family matter." My mother froze mid-stride, her hand hovering over the gravy boat. Ryan didn't even look up. This was my father's classic move, the dramatic pause, the stage setting for a monologue where he was the hero and everyone else was a supporting actor with a script they hadn't read. He cleared his throat. "As you know, your mother and I are getting older. It's time to start thinking about the future, about legacy." I braced myself. The legacy speech usually preceded a request for a small loan for one of Ryan's disastrous business ventures, a food truck that never sold a taco, a crypto scheme that imploded overnight. Ryan was the golden boy, the one my father saw himself in, despite all evidence pointing to the contrary. I was the reliable one, the one who was expected to be the safety net. "We've been doing some financial planning," he continued, his eyes locking onto mine, deliberately excluding my brother. "And we've come to a wonderful solution that will secure this family's future for generations." From beside his chair, he lifted a thick, cream-colored envelope and slid it across the polished wood of the dining table. It stopped just short of my plate. It didn't have my name on it. It didn't need to. Every eye, except Ryan's, was on me. "I have a surprise for you, Morgan," he said, a smile playing on his lips that didn't reach his eyes. "This is for you." My heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. Surprises from my father were never good. They were transactions, obligations wrapped in the guise of generosity. I remembered the car he gifted me for graduation, which came with a loan agreement I was expected to sign and pay. Or the vacation that turned out to be a timeshare presentation where I was pressured to co-sign. I picked up the envelope. It was heavy, far too heavy to be a simple card. Inside, a sheaf of papers was held together by a large clip. The top page was a letter, typed on expensive letterhead from a private lending firm I'd never heard of. The first sentence made the air rush from my lungs. Agreement for assumption of debt. I scanned the page, my eyes jumping over the legal jargon, my brain, trained to find the bottom line, searching for the number. And then I saw it. My vision swam for a second, the world narrowing to the string of digits printed in stark black ink. $900,000. I looked up from the page, my face a mask of disbelief. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "It's the surprise," my father boomed, his smile widening. "It's an investment. We took out a series of loans over the years to fund Ryan's businesses, to maintain the house, to live the life we deserve. We've consolidated it all into one manageable package. Manageable? I choked out, the word feeling like ash in my mouth. This is nearly $1 million. Why are you giving this to me? Because you can handle it, he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. You're the financial wizard, Morgan. You make a ridiculous salary playing with other people's money. This is your chance to use that talent for your own family. We're making you the custodian of our legacy. The audacity of it was breathtaking. He wasn't asking. He was anointing me. He had taken decades of his and Ryan's financial irresponsibility, gift-wrapped it in legalese, and called it a surprise. My mother was watching me, her expression a painful mix of hope and apology. Ryan finally looked up from his phone, a flicker of a smirk on his face. He knew about this. They had all planned it. I dropped the papers on the table as if they were contaminated. No, I said, the word clear and cold in the suddenly silent room. My father's smile vanished. What did you say? I said no, I repeated, my voice gaining strength. I stood up, my chair scraping harshly against the floor. I am not signing this. I am not taking responsibility for this. This is your debt. His debt. I gestured towards Ryan, who now looked indignant. That's not fair. Ryan whined. My ideas were solid. The market just wasn't ready. The market wasn't ready for you to sink hundreds of thousands of dollars into a vaporware app? I shot back, my control finally snapping. My father slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. Enough, he roared. This isn't a negotiation, Morgan. This is your duty. This family has given you everything. A good home, an education. An education I paid for myself, with scholarships and student loans I am still paying off. I countered, my voice rising. Everything I have, I built myself, with no help from you. And now it's time to give back, he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. He stood up, his tall frame looming over the table. You will sign those papers. You will take on this debt. Or what, exactly? I challenged, my chin jutting out. My entire life had been a series of capitulations to this man's will. Not this time. He leaned forward, his knuckles white on the table. Or you will be cut off. No more family. No more inheritance. Your mother and I will be done with you. You will be completely and utterly on your own. The threat was meant to shatter me. For years, the fear of being cast out, of losing the fragile connection to the only family I had kept me in line. But as I looked at the three of them, my domineering father, my complicit mother, and my leech of a brother, I didn't feel fear. I felt the cold, liberating calm of clarity. The inheritance he spoke of was a myth, a carrot dangled for decades that I now knew was nothing but debt. The drive back to my apartment was a blur of streetlights and simmering rage. The cold fury that had propelled me out of my parents' house was beginning to give way to a sickening anxiety. Had I just blown up my life? The threat of being disowned, once my greatest fear, had been realized. But as I unlocked the door to my quiet, orderly apartment, a space that was mine, bought and paid for with my own hard work, the anxiety began to recede, replaced by a steely resolve. I wasn't just going to walk away. I was going to understand. The next morning, I called in a personal day. My mind, usually occupied with market projections and client portfolios, was now focused on a single, glaring problem, the $900,000 debt. My father had presented it as a consolidated loan, but that was too simple, too clean for the messy reality of his finances. He was a man who opened new credit cards to pay off old ones, who saw bankruptcy as a strategic maneuver rather than a last resort. My first call was to Jessica, my best friend since college. She was a brutally sharp corporate lawyer, and the only person I knew who could look at a legal document and see the matrix of traps hidden within the jargon. He did what? She exclaimed after I recounted the disastrous Sunday dinner. The sound of her furiously typing on her keyboard echoed down the line. Morgan, that's not just outrageous, that's... I don't even have a word for it. Send me pictures of every single page in that envelope. Now. I had, in my haste and anger, left the envelope on the dining room table. A calculated risk. Leaving it there was a clear refusal. But now I needed it. I sent a curt, non-negotiable text to my mother, please leave the envelope from last night on the front porch. I will pick it up in an hour. Do not try to speak to me. To my surprise, she complied. When I pulled up to the house, the cream-colored envelope was sitting on the welcome mat, a silent testament to the chasm that had opened between us. I didn't linger. Back in my apartment, I spread the documents across my glass coffee table and sent high-resolution photos to Jessica. While she worked, I started my own investigation. My father had mentioned a private lending firm, Apex Financial Solutions. I'd never heard of them. My initial online search brought up a bare-bones website, full of stock photos of smiling families and vague promises of creative financial strategies. There was no physical address listed, only a P.O. box. Red flag number 1. A deeper dive into business registries revealed that Apex Financial Solutions was an LLC formed just 18 months ago. The registered agent was a name I didn't recognize, but the address was a mailbox rental store in a strip mall 2 towns over. Red flag number 2. This wasn't a legitimate financial institution. This was a shell corporation. My phone buzzed. It was Jessica. Okay, I've read through this mess, she said, her voice tight with anger. This isn't a standard loan assumption agreement. It's predatory, for one. The interest rate is criminal. But more importantly, the underlying debts it's consolidating, it doesn't list them. It just refers to various personal and business loans held by David and Ryan Vance. It's a blank check. If you sign this, you're agreeing to pay whatever they claim they owe, to whomever they claim they owe it. A cold dread washed over me. So it's not just the $900,000. Exactly. That's just the number they put on the front page to anchor you. The clauses in the appendices allow 4 adjustments based on newly discovered liabilities. Morgan, this is a trap, designed to legally chain you to their entire financial history, past, present, and future. Red flag number 3, and it was the size of a billboard. And guess who the sole proprietor of Apex Financial Solutions is? Jessica continued. I already knew the answer, but I needed to hear it. Let me guess. My father? Close. The registered agent is a man named Charles Sterling, but the signatory on behalf of Apex, on every single page of this agreement? It's your brother, Ryan Vance. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. Ryan. My lazy, incompetent brother, who couldn't balance his own checkbook, was the face of this predatory lending company. My father had cooked up this scheme, not just to offload his debt onto me, but to do it through a company controlled by his favored son. It was a grotesque transfer of wealth, from me to them, disguised as a family obligation. My phone started ringing. The caller ID read Dad. I let it go to voicemail. A moment later, a text message appeared. Morgan, your mother is very upset. You are being incredibly selfish. I have given you 24 hours to reconsider. If you do not sign those papers, you know the consequences. This is your final chance to prove you are a part of this family. The threat felt hollow now. The emotional blackmail that had governed my life for 30 years had been exposed for what it was, a tool of financial manipulation. He wasn't asking for help. He was staging a heist. So, what do? I asked Jessica, pacing my living room. Legally? You don't have to do a thing. Don't sign it. Don't even respond to them. Block their numbers if you have to, she advised. But personally? Knowing you? You're not going to let this go. She was right. This wasn't just about refusing to sign a document anymore. This was about dismantling the entire rotten structure of lies and entitlement my father had built. He had underestimated me. He saw me as a walking, talking ATM. He didn't see the woman who could analyze complex financial systems, identify patterns of fraud, and follow a money trail through the darkest corners of the market. He thought he was handing me a burden. He had no idea he had just handed me a roadmap to his own destruction. The debt wasn't mine, but the fight was. And it was a fight I was uniquely qualified to win. The next 48 hours were a blur of caffeine and spreadsheets. My initial shock had crystallized into a cold, methodical anger. My father and brother had tried to execute a financial ambush, and I was now treating it as such. I was no longer their daughter or sister, I was a forensic analyst, and my own family was the subject of the investigation. My first step was to create a complete financial picture of my father and brother. It was a daunting task. My father was old school, a man of handshakes and cash deals, while Ryan was new school, dabbling in cryptocurrency and a dozen different online payment platforms. It was a deliberately confusing mix of the tangible and the digital, designed to obscure and misdirect. I started with what I knew. For years, I had been the family's unofficial tech support and, foolishly, had set up many of their online accounts. I still had access to shared cloud storage, old email accounts, and other digital breadcrumbs they had long forgotten. It felt like a violation of privacy, but they had tried to saddle me with $1 million debt. The rules of engagement had changed. In a forgotten folder on a shared family drive, I found my first breakthrough, scanned copies of old loan applications my father had filled out. Comparing them to the documents from Apex Financial, a pattern emerged. My father had been systematically inflating his assets and income for years to secure loans from legitimate banks. He'd list my investment portfolio as a co-signed asset, forge my signature on consent forms, and claim my income as part of the household earnings, long after I had moved out. He was committing bank fraud, using me as his unknowing accomplice. The anger that flared in me was hot and sharp. This wasn't just about the $900,000. This was about my name, my reputation, my professional integrity. He had been risking my entire future for his own selfish gains. Next, I turned my attention to Ryan. His digital footprint was a chaotic mess of vanity projects and get-rich-quick schemes. He had a dozen different social media profiles, each one presenting a different version of himself: the crypto guru, the life coach, the app developer, the day trader. It was all a facade. The real story was in the transaction histories I managed to piece together from old emails and linked payment service accounts. Ryan was a financial black hole. Money poured in from my father and was immediately funneled into online gambling sites, high-risk, unregulated stock trades, and a string of expensive subscriptions for services he barely used. The businesses he claimed to be building were nothing more than websites with no products, designed to look legitimate enough to justify another cash injection from our father. The so-called investments my father had mentioned during that Sunday dinner were a complete fiction. There was no food truck, no app in development. There were just gambling losses and a lifestyle funded by debt, a lifestyle he flaunted on Instagram with pictures of rented sports cars and trips to Vegas. The most damning discovery came from an old, shared email account. Buried in the spam folder was a series of email notifications from a web hosting service. Ryan had purchased dozens of domain names over the past 2 years. Names like Vance Capital, Sterling Investments, and, my personal favorite, Legacy Holdings Group. Apex Financial Solutions was just the latest, most sophisticated iteration of his scam. He would create a professional-looking website, register an LLC for a few $100s, and then use it as a vehicle to receive and launder the money my father was borrowing. This wasn't just irresponsibility. This was a coordinated, deliberate, long-term fraud scheme. My father would secure loans using fraudulent information that included me, and then funnel the money to Ryan through these shell corporations under the guise of investing. Ryan would then burn through the cash, and the cycle would repeat. The $900,000 wasn't a consolidation of legitimate business loans. It was the sum total of their deception, the bill for their entire fraudulent enterprise, and they had decided that I was the one who was going to pay it. Armed with this information, the tone of my father's texts and voicemails, which continued to flood my phone, began to sound different. "You are tearing this family apart, Morgan. Your mother is a wreck. This is your final warning. We are going to the lawyers on Monday. I can't believe how ungrateful you've been after everything we've done for you." His blustering threats were no longer intimidating. They were the desperate, panicked messages of a man who knew his scheme was on the verge of collapsing. He wasn't angry that I was refusing to help, he was terrified that I was smart enough to figure out exactly what he had done. I spent the weekend meticulously organizing my findings. I created timelines, flowcharts, and a detailed spreadsheet that tracked the flow of money from the initial bank loans to Ryan's various shell companies and finally to his personal accounts. Every fraudulent loan application, every forged signature, every email, every transaction, it all went into a secure digital folder, a war chest of evidence. By Sunday night, exactly 1 week after the disastrous dinner, I sat in front of my laptop, looking at the digital tapestry of their deceit. The web they had spun was intricate and ugly, designed to trap and drain me. But now, I could see every single thread. And I knew exactly which ones to pull to make the entire thing unravel. Monday morning arrived, not with the usual dread of a work week, but with a surge of adrenaline. My father's deadline had passed. I had ignored his final, threatening text. The ball was in my court now, and I had no intention of playing defense. My first call was not to my parents, but to a man named Marcus Thorne. Marcus was a forensic accountant, a bloodhound who could sniff out a single fraudulent entry in a mountain of financial data. I had worked with his firm once on a corporate merger, and his team's ability to find hidden liabilities was legendary. He was expensive, but this was an investment in my own liberation. I met him in a sterile conference room in his downtown office, the city skyline gleaming behind him. I laid out the story, my voice calm and detached, as if I were presenting a case study about a particularly dysfunctional client. I showed him the Apex financial documents, the fraudulent loan applications, the flowchart of Ryan's shell companies. Marcus listened intently, his face impassive. He scanned the documents, his eyes moving with a speed and precision that was almost unnerving. When I was finished, he leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen on his notepad. "Well, Ms. Vance," he said, his voice dry. "This is quite the family heirloom they've tried to pass down to you." He looked at my spreadsheet. "Your preliminary work is impressive. You've already uncovered the basic structure of the fraud. My team can substantiate it. We'll dig into the bank records, file subpoenas for the LLCs, and create an official, ironclad audit trail. When we're done, you'll have a report that will be admissible in any court of law." "And what do you think the report will show?" I asked, although I already knew. "It will show a clear pattern of conspiracy to commit bank fraud between your father and your brother. It will show money laundering through a series of shell corporations. And it will show that this debt assumption agreement is a transparent attempt to make you the accessory after the fact, the person left holding the bag when the whole thing collapses." He paused. "They're not just trying to give you their debt, Ms. Vance. They're trying to give you their crimes." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Crimes. I had been thinking in terms of betrayal and manipulation. Marcus was thinking in terms of felonies and prison sentences. I hired him on the spot. His team went to work immediately, and the silence from my family, which I had initially found peaceful, now felt ominous. They were planning something. My father was not a man who accepted defeat. A few days later, I found out what it was. A letter arrived at my apartment via courier. It was from a law firm, a well-known and aggressive litigation practice that specialized in messy family disputes. The letter was a formal demand. It stated that I had entered into a verbal agreement to assume my family's financial responsibilities. It claimed that, for years, my financial support had been a cornerstone of their planning and that my sudden refusal constituted a breach of familial duty and promissory estoppel. It was absurd, a complete fabrication from start to finish. But it was also a clear escalation. They were no longer trying to emotionally blackmail me, they were trying to legally intimidate me. They were attempting to drag me into a costly, public, and embarrassing legal battle, hoping I would rather sign their papers than face the spectacle. I immediately forwarded the letter to Jessica. Her response was a single line of text, LOL. Let me handle this. Jessica's official response to their lawyer was a masterclass in legal savagery. She systematically dismantled their claims, called their verbal agreement a work of fiction, and politely informed them that any further attempts to contact me would be considered harassment. The final paragraph was the masterstroke. Furthermore, she wrote, "Be advised that our client has engaged the services of Thorne Forensic Accounting to conduct a full audit of Mr. David Vance and Mr. Ryan Vance's financial activities, particularly as they relate to a number of potentially fraudulent loan applications and the operations of several LLCs, including but not limited to Apex Financial Solutions. We are confident that any legal discovery process will be illuminating." It was a declaration of war. The response from my father's lawyer was swift and telling. The aggressive tone vanished, replaced by a much more conciliatory one. They suggested a private family meeting to resolve this unfortunate misunderstanding without the need for further legal action. They were panicking. The word audit had terrified them. They had assumed I would fight them on the emotional front, that I would argue about what was fair or what a daughter's duty should be. They never imagined I would come at them with forensic accountants and the veiled threat of criminal investigation. "They want a meeting," I told Jessica over the phone. "Of course they do," she said. "They want to get you in a room and fall back on their old tactics. Guilt, shouting, tears. Don't do it. Let me handle all communication." "No," I said, a newfound sense of resolve hardening my voice. "I'll take the meeting. But not on their terms. On mine." I knew what I had to do. This couldn't be resolved through lawyers' letters. It needed a final, definitive confrontation. I had spent a lifetime being spoken at in my father's dining room. It was time for them to listen to me. The week leading up to the family meeting was a strategic waiting game. Marcus Thorne's team was working at an incredible pace, unearthing more and more evidence. Every day, he would send me a brief, encrypted email with an update. They had found the original loan documents my father had used me as a phantom cosigner on. They had traced transfers from those loan accounts directly to the LLCs Ryan had set up. They had even found evidence that Ryan was using the LLCs to pay for his personal rent and car payments, a clear case of piercing the corporate veil. The audit report was becoming a financial horror story, and every page gave me more leverage. Meanwhile, my mother had started a campaign of her own. She left long, tearful voicemails, begging me to be the bigger person and think of the family. She sent texts with old family photos, pictures of me as a smiling child on my father's knee. "We were so happy then," she wrote. "What happened to us?" Her attempts to appeal to a nostalgic past I barely remembered were pathetic and transparent. The happy family in those photos was a fiction, a carefully curated image that hid the dysfunction festering just beneath the surface. Her messages were no longer heartbreaking, they were infuriating. Her weakness, her refusal to stand up to my father's tyranny, had enabled this entire situation. She was as much a part of the problem as he and Ryan were. I didn't respond to any of them. I decided the meeting would take place on my turf. Not their house, not a lawyer's office. I booked a small, neutral ground conference room at a downtown hotel. I also set the agenda. I sent a single email to my father, my mother, and Ryan. "The meeting will be at 10 a.m. on Saturday at the Grand Hotel, Conference Room 3. You will listen to what I have to say without interruption. You will have a chance to respond when I am finished. Jessica Davis, my legal counsel, will be present. I strongly advise you to bring yours. The morning of the meeting, I felt a strange sense of calm. The fear and anxiety that had plagued me for years were gone, replaced by the cold certainty of the facts on my side. I dressed in a dark gray suit, my professional armor. Jessica met me in the lobby, carrying a slim briefcase. "You ready for this?" she asked, her expression serious. "I'm ready," I said. "Let's go." We entered the conference room to find them already there, a miserable tableau of a family in crisis. My father stood stiffly by the window, trying to project an air of authority that he no longer possessed. My mother sat at the table, clutching a tissue in her trembling hand. Ryan was slouched in a chair, staring at his phone, his usual bravado completely gone. He looked like a petulant child who had been caught. Their lawyer, a tired-looking man in a rumpled suit, sat beside them, a folder of papers in front of him that he seemed reluctant to open. I took my seat directly across from my father. Jessica sat beside me, placing her briefcase on the table but not opening it. "Thank you for coming," I began, my voice even and steady. "I'm going to keep this brief. For my entire adult life, I have been treated as this family's financial backstop. An emergency fund to be tapped for every poor decision and failed venture. 2 weeks ago, you escalated that expectation. You presented me with a fraudulent document, created by a shell corporation, in an attempt to coerce me into assuming $900,000 of debt that you and Ryan accrued through irresponsible and, in many cases, illegal means." My father's face turned a deep shade of red. He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. "As I said, you will not interrupt me." He snapped his mouth shut, his jaw working silently. "You threatened to disown me if I refused," I continued, my gaze unwavering. "You attempted to intimidate me with a baseless legal threat. You fundamentally misunderstood the person you were dealing with. You thought I would crumble. Instead, I did what I do best, I ran the numbers." I slid a single piece of paper across the table. It was a one-page summary of the forensic audit, a high-level overview of their crimes. It listed the banks, the dates of the fraudulent loan applications, and the names of Ryan's shell companies. It was simple, concise, and utterly damning. "I have spent the last 2 weeks conducting a deep-dive forensic audit into your finances," I explained. "I have documented every instance of bank fraud you committed using my name. I have traced the money laundered through Ryan's shell companies. I have a complete, verified, and legally admissible record of your decades of financial mismanagement and criminal activity." My mother let out a small sob. Ryan refused to look up from the floor. My father stared at the paper, his face ashen. His lawyer read it, and a look of profound weariness settled over him. He knew what it meant. "I have this report," I said, my voice dropping slightly. "And I have 2 options. Option A, I walk out of this room, and this report goes directly to the district attorney's office, as well as the fraud departments of the half-dozen banks you've defrauded. Given the scale and duration of your activities, I looked directly at my father, and my eyes moved to Ryan, will be facing serious federal charges. You will lose everything. The house, the cars, your reputations, and your freedom. You will likely go to prison." The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by my mother's ragged breathing. "Or," I said, letting the weight of my first option settle, "there is option B. You will sign a legally binding document, which my lawyer has already prepared, stating that I am in no way responsible for any of your past, present, or future debts. You will cease all contact with me, indefinitely. No calls, no texts, no emails, no showing up at my apartment or my office. We will dissolve this family, right here, right now. In exchange, the audit report remains private. I will not pursue criminal charges. I will simply disappear from your lives." I leaned back in my chair. "That is the offer. There is no negotiation. You have 5 minutes to decide." The 5 minutes I gave them stretched into an eternity. My father's lawyer leaned over and whispered frantically in his ear. My father, for the first time in my life, looked utterly defeated. The bluster, the arrogance, the unshakable self-certainty, it had all evaporated, leaving behind a scared, aging man who had been caught in a trap of his own making. My mother was openly weeping now, her quiet sobs a miserable soundtrack to the collapse of her world. Ryan looked physically ill, his face pale and clammy. The reality of prison, of actual consequences for his actions, was a concept he had never been forced to consider before. Morgan, please, my mother whispered, her voice cracking. You can't do this. We're your family. You stopped being my family the moment you decided my future was collateral for your mistakes, I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. I felt nothing for her tears. They were not for me, or for the betrayal I had suffered. They were for herself, for the comfortable life that was about to be ripped away. There must be another way, my father said, his voice raspy. He was looking at me, but his eyes were pleading. The king was finally begging. There isn't, I said flatly. This is the only way. Your choice is simple, you lose your money, or you lose your freedom. Which is it going to be? Their lawyer cleared his throat. My clients, he began, choosing his words with extreme care, find option B, acceptable in principle. We would, of course, need to review the document your counsel has prepared. Jessica slid a folder across the table. Be my guest. It's a standard separation agreement with a non-contact clause and a full release of all financial claims. It's very straightforward. As the lawyer read through the document, my father seemed to shrink in his chair. All the fight was gone. He knew he was beaten. He had leveraged our family bond against me for my entire life, and I had just called his bluff with a hand he could never beat, the truth. Ryan, however, had one last spark of pathetic defiance. So that's it, he mumbled, finally looking up at me, his eyes full of resentment. You get to just walk away and ruin our lives? I met his gaze with a cold stare. Ruin your lives? I'm saving your lives. You should be thanking me. The deal I'm offering you is infinitely better than the one you deserve. I'm giving you a chance to avoid federal prison. What you do with that chance is up to you. But it will have nothing to do with me. He flinched as if I had slapped him, and looked away. The lawyer finished reading the agreement. He nodded curtly to my father. It's as she says. It's a clean break. My father closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, they were filled with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. He knew I had won. He knew I had beaten him at his own game. He picked up the pen with a trembling hand. Where do I sign? He asked, his voice a low growl of defeat. One by one, they signed the document. My father's signature was an angry slash of ink. My mother's was a tear-smudged, shaky scrawl. Ryan's was the barely legible signature of a sulking child. When they were done, Jessica took the papers, reviewed the signatures, and placed them securely in her briefcase. It's done, she said. I stood up. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't offer any parting words of comfort or condemnation. There was nothing left to say. I had presented the facts, stated my terms, and achieved my objective. It was a transaction, the final, painful transaction with the people who had raised me. As I walked towards the door, my father spoke one last time, his voice laced with venom. You'll regret this, Morgan. One day you'll be old and alone, and you'll have no one. I paused at the door but didn't turn around. I was already alone, Dad, I said quietly. The only difference is that now, I'm free. And with that, I walked out of the conference room, leaving the wreckage of my former family behind me, and stepped out into the bright, clear light of my future. The months that followed were a study in silence. True to the agreement, they never contacted me again. My phone remained quiet. My inbox was free of manipulative pleas. The constant, low-grade hum of anxiety that had been the background noise of my entire life slowly faded, replaced by a profound sense of peace. I unsubscribed from their lives completely. I blocked their numbers as a precaution and muted their names on social media, not out of anger anymore, but out of a simple, detached lack of interest. What they did, where they went, how they managed to stay afloat, it was no longer my concern. My life was my own, and the feeling was more liberating than I could have ever imagined. Jessica told me, through back channels in the legal community, that my father's lawyer had likely negotiated settlements with the banks, probably by selling off the house and any other remaining assets to avoid prosecution. They had chosen to lose their money to save their freedom, just as I had predicted. The suburban castle was gone, the facade of wealth and success they had worked so hard to maintain had crumbled. I felt a brief, detached satisfaction, but no real joy. Their failure wasn't my victory, my freedom was. With the energy I had once spent managing my family's crises, I poured myself into my work and my own life. I excelled at my job, earning a promotion to vice president. I reconnected with old friends I had neglected. I started traveling, not to escape, but to explore. I went to places I had only ever dreamed of, from the ancient ruins of Rome to the bustling markets of Marrakesh. With every new stamp in my passport, the ghost of that $900,000 debt grew fainter. It had been meant to be an anchor, a weight that would drown me. Instead, it had been a catalyst. It had forced a confrontation that was decades overdue and had given me the unexpected gift of a clean break. About a year later, Jessica and I were having brunch at a small cafe downtown. "Have you heard from them?" she asked gently, swirling the ice in her glass. "Not a word," I said with a smile. "And you?" "Their lawyer called me once, a few months ago. A procedural question about the transfer of the house title. He said David and Susan moved into a small rental apartment an hour out of the city. Ryan is living with them." I processed the information. The image of the three of them, crammed into a small apartment, their kingdom shrunk to a few rented rooms, was a pathetic one. The golden boy had ended up back in his parents' house, and the king was ruling over a failed state. There was a certain justice in it. "And you?" Jessica asked, her eyes searching mine. "Are you okay?" I thought about it for a moment, truly considered it. The scars were there, of course. The betrayal had left its mark. But it no longer hurt. It was just a part of my story, a chapter that was now closed. "I'm better than okay," I said, and the words tasted true. "I'm happy. I'm free. I'm not carrying the weight of their choices anymore. I'm just me." Leaving that conference room a year ago, I had felt a sense of grim victory. But now, sitting in the sunlit cafe, laughing with my friend, I realized my real victory wasn't in their defeat. It was in the quiet, unburdened life I was building for myself, a life built not on obligation or duty, but on my own terms. My father had handed me an envelope full of debt, but in refusing it, I had claimed something far more valuable, my own future. And it was worth more than any amount of money.